So for my historical analysis research paper, I decided to read Herland, written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So just a little bit of background information on Charlotte Perkins Gilman. She was born on July 3rd, 1860 in Hartford, Connecticut, and would later die in Pasadena, California in 1935 at the age of 75. She is most known as an American novelist and humanist, and actually her unorthodox views would make her a role model to feminists years later. Some other well-known works of hers include The Yellow Wallpaper, With Her in Our which is actually the second book in the Herland trilogy, Woman in Economics, and When I Was a Witch. So Herland actually takes place in the same time period of its publication in the 1915s. The second book in the trilogy picks up right after the events that happened in Herland, and in that book they actually discuss topics such as the First World War. So it is a work of fiction, and because it was written in 1915, it makes it a primary source. So the story is written from the perspective of sociologist Van Dyke Jennings. He refers to himself as Van, and two of his friends from college, Terry O. Nicholson and Jeff McGrave. The three of them go on an expedition to find a country which is described by savages as a land made up of only women and no men. Van, Terry, and Jeff could not accept the theory of a country without men, and during their travels, they discussed about what they expected the country to be like. Jeff was a poet and botanist at heart. He idolized women and envisioned the country to be filled with roses and babies like a peaceful sisterhood. Terry, on the other hand, visualized a summer resort just filled with young women at his disposal. Van, being a sociologist, he pictured more of a matriarchal society where the men lived separately from the women and would only make annual mating visits to them. But once they arrived, they realized their predictions were far from the truth. So once they arrived into the actual country, they met three young women named Celise, Alima, and Elidor. And after introducing themselves, Terry offered to Alima this beautiful, expensive, because Terry, he had a lot of money, shiny necklace as bait in the hope to grab her. Right away, the woman, she grabs the necklace and just runs off before the men can even comprehend what had just happened. They are amazed by their speed and agility, and after the men tried running after them, they actually ended up walking into one of the villages where they were met and surrounded by all these strong women. These women showed absolutely no terror, no unease, no emotion at all, and signaled to the three to go into one of the nearby buildings. Van and his companions would not give in to their wishes, and in an attempt to scare them off, Terry grabs his pistol and shoots it into the air, actually hitting one of the women. Instantly, they were seized by a few women and were given an anesthetic and carried away. The men would later wake up in a fortress in new clothes. Their clothing was nowhere in sight. These clothes were tunics or dresses with lots of pockets. And they were greeted by tutors who were supposed to teach them their language and history. So during Van's studies, he actually discovers that 2,000 years ago, all the men were killed in a volcanic eruption during battle, which sealed their country off from the rest of the world. The remaining men were mostly slaves, and when they tried taking control of the country, the women fought back and killed all of them. They were essentially left hopeless. Then one day, one of the surviving women became pregnant with a daughter, having a virgin birth. She then would go on to also bear 4 more daughters. Those 5 daughters that she would have would also grow up to have 5 daughters of their own. This would then enlighten the women, and they began surrounding their society around motherhood, working together to improve their education, their lands, and their children, which the women saw all the children as their own, even if she chose not to have her own children. They were just as interested in learning about the outside world, asking many questions about their woman. After being held captive in the fortress for a few months, the men actually tried escaping through the window of their room, and they used bed sheets and blankets and tied them up together to climb down the window. But the woman knew about their attempt to escape all along. This was a big tease for them. And they were caught and essentially brought right back to the fortress. But they were treated well, fed well, they continued their education, and once the women felt that they could trust them, they were allowed to freely roam the lands and meet the young women. Once they were allowed to meet the young women, they actually formed relationships with the 3 young women they met when they arrived. Van was with Ellador, Jeff with Celise, and Terry with Alima. There were many difficulties in their relationships because of the woman's lack of experience of romance and sexual intercourse. Terry actually takes it the hardest and cannot understand how to have a relationship with a woman who, in his eyes, is not a woman at all. She carries none of the physical characteristics or emotional characteristics he always thought women had. Nonetheless, the 3 couples get married, even though the women see absolutely no point in their marriages since they don't really have a big source of religion. Terry is still unable to understand the relationship and actually attempts to rape Alima. The women hold a trial to discuss Terry's alleged rape, and after standing trial, Terry is actually ordered to leave Herland and return home. Since the biplane they flew into the country on had to be operated by 2 people, Van realizes that he must follow Terry home, but Ellador will not let him leave without her. Jeff decides to stay in Herland with Celise, who is actually pregnant with their child. Van and Terry promise not to reveal the country to the rest of the world until Ellador returned home. But in the end, Van is very skeptical about Ellador going out to the world as he feels she's not prepared for what she will find and see out there. So this is actually the end of Herland. It ends with them going back home and Van not knowing how Ellador will react to everything that she sees in the outside. So with her in Our Land, the second book to the Herland trilogy, it actually follows Van and Ellador's travels throughout the world, and it looks at her Herlandic point of view on gender roles, education, and the First World War. This book, along with our course, helped me understand how tremendous women's progress was. Van, Terry, and Jeff actually represents 3 different attitudes towards women in the early 1900s, and these attitudes are reflected in their first predictions of what a country of women would be like. Instead, they are proven wrong and shown how advanced a woman's mind is and all she can accomplish if given the opportunity. This is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed and have a great rest of your day.